Be great. So previously on Bad Neighbors, we've been talking about how Jesus, with a single story, redefined what it means to be a neighbor. But he didn't just redefine what a neighbor acts like, he redefined who our neighbors actually are. And so we talked about how bad neighbors aren't just the people who play their music too loud, the people who don't take care of their lawns or let their dogs go on your lawn and don't clean it up. By the way, that is one of my biggest pet peeves. I just want to run out and yell at people, be like a crazy person when that happens. They're not just the people who are jerks to everybody. They're not just the people who complain about you to the HOA. They're not just people who steal your Wi-Fi. By the way, I just realized in my notes I put wife instead of Wi-Fi. So they're not just the people who steal either your Wi-Fi or your wife. But it's much more subtle and socially acceptable than any of that. Because bad neighbors are people, at least what we're seeing in the story of Jesus that he told, are people who are just so self-involved that they don't actually notice the needs of the people around them. Or if they do, they're just too busy to care. Or they're people that are so judgmental that their default to just kind of the world around them is they just don't get involved with people, especially the messy ones, especially because it's just inconvenient. Have you ever had a moment in your life or in your day where you saw a reflection of yourself and it kind of shocked you? Like you felt fine, you thought you looked pretty good, but then you saw yourself and realized, nope, it's an off day. Has that ever happened to you? Like your hair's jacked, your shirt's a little tighter than you thought, and it's like the buttons are screaming for mercy, like they're being held together just barely, like help me, or your zipper was down, or you got like a little booger in your nose, or there's food on your face, or it looks like you did your makeup in the dark, half asleep. And it's very deflating, right? And what's worse though is when you then ask your friends or you ask the people around you and you're like, hey, why didn't you tell me? And they're just like, what? Like, you look normal. This is the way you always look. And you're just like, oh my gosh, we're about to fight, right? Like you and me are not okay. But what's funny is that when that happens, when we have those moments, the awareness that one part of us is sort of off is enough to kind of make us double check some of the other things, some of the other stuff, and make sure we're not missing anything else, right? Like we check our teeth, we look in the mirror, got anything in my teeth, does my breath smell? Like, okay, I remember deodorant today, I'm good. Like we check to see if our socks match, like did we put on clean clothes? And so Jesus tells this story that functions as this kind of horrifying mirror in which we see ourselves, not physically, but we can see our hearts, we can see our souls, we can see into the very darkest parts of ourselves. But the mirror he uses to help us see who we really are and how things are between us and God, really. It's this interaction. It's interactions with other people. That's the mirror that he holds up in this story. Like, have you ever just felt like you're an awesome person when you're alone? Like when you're by yourself, man, you are golden. It's only when other people kind of enter the chat. It's when other people enter your space that then your awesome level kind of drops. Like ever noticed how everybody is awesome when no one else is around? Like you're an awesome husband until your wife wants something. Or you're an awesome wife until your husband gets on that very last nerve of yours. Like we're all the world's greatest parents right up until the moment we actually have kids, right? See, I don't want to brag, but I'm so patient when I'm by myself. I'm incredibly thoughtful, kind, and considerate when I'm alone. But the moment other people get sort of introduced into the mix, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. So I was reading this study this week about an organization that comes alongside of businesses and people to help them deal with and navigate complicated people and situations. And part of what they do is they ask people in these organizations, they just ask individuals, like how do you define complicated? And they said that what they've discovered is that when it comes to people issues, complicated is complicated. Because they've asked thousands of people and gotten all kinds of answers. And some of the responses were pretty great. They actually reported that when asked to define complicated, one person simply wrote, Leslie. Another person wrote the name Nate. And then my personal favorite, another person didn't single anybody out. They just wrote, people are really dumb. That's what makes it complicated, which is funny, right? But there's also part of me that's sometimes like, well, he's not wrong. People can be really dumb. Anybody ever felt that way? See, part of the reason that we're doing this series is that we all have a code. We all have an ethic that we live by when it comes to the way that we treat and respond to people. And it's not just the complicated people, but all people. And for a lot of us, we got our code from our family. It's my mama told me, or my daddy always said, or my grandpa always taught me. But have you ever met somebody they got their code from their zip code? You ever met anybody like that? Like, I grew up in Chicago, man. Like, I'm from New York. I'm from LA. You know, it's like, who cares? Why do you change your voice when you say where you're from? Like, you're just trying to, anybody got any friends that like are from kind of a rough area and they still got a little hood in them, you know? They're all nice and sweet until their buttons get pushed and it's like, oh, girl, you don't want to play with me. I'm from the South Side kind of thing, you know? You know what I'm talking about? Because everybody's got their own code. And so the idea in this series is like, whatever your code is, no matter how good you are, no matter how logical it is, or even how moral your code seems, or maybe even is, that all of us would bring our code into the presence or into this conversation with Jesus, because Jesus definitely had a code. Jesus definitely had an ethic for the way that his movement, his family, his people would treat and respond to other people. And he talked about it all the time, but it's perfectly captured in this one parable that he told, the Good Samaritan, this parable that we've been looking at and reading all month long. So we're going to look at it and read it together one last time as we end our series today. It's found in Luke chapter 10, beginning with verse 25. It says this. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus, and he said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" Now, if you haven't been here, this conversation between Jesus and this religious expert, it really sets up the parable that Jesus is going to tell in just a second. But the reason I keep coming back here and starting with this conversation is because there's so many things that are a part of it that I don't want you to miss. So this guy, he asks a great question in an attempt to it's not a sincere question, but it's an attempt to try to trap Jesus, but it's a great question. And in response, Jesus asks questions of his own. He says, "What's written in the law?" And then he asks a brilliant question. "How do you read it?" This is such a profound question because I think it's still at the heart of the matter, even for us today, for all of us, especially if you're a Christian, especially if you're a Jesus follower, because you can have all the right information, you can have all the facts, you can even have the truth. The question is, how do you read it? How are you interpreting it? How are you applying it to your life? Have you ever been in a situation where you said about somebody like that person knows just enough, or they have just enough truth to be dangerous? They know just enough about that to, hurt themselves or be a mess, right? What we're really saying is they might have the right info, but man, they really lack wisdom in the way that they're interpreting it. They might have all the truth, but they don't really have understanding in how they're applying it or using it in their life. And so Jesus presses this guy and he says, "What do the scriptures say? How do you read it?" And so the guy responds. Verse 27, he answered and said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind." Love God with all you got. And he says, "And love your neighbor as yourself." Verse 28, Jesus said, "You have answered correctly. You have the right information. Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, and so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Now, the most interesting part of this back and forth to me is this guy had the right answer, but he had the wrong application. Jesus even tells him, "Hey, good job. That's the right answer. You are correct. That's exactly the right answer." But then he says, "Do this and you will live." See, God is not impressed with what we know. God's not impressed with how much Bible you know. He's not impressed with how often you go to church. He's not impressed with how passionate we worship him. He's not impressed by any of that. He's impressed by how we apply what we know. He's impressed by how we live it out. Do you know the truth, but can you live it out? Are you actually living by it? Not just can you quote a verse, but are you living that truth in your life? The problem was the guy had the right answer, but it says he wanted to justify himself. He wanted to find a loophole. He wanted a way out of not doing it. So went back and did a little research this week. Like, the word justify actually comes from a Greek word, yabut. I actually think the correct pronunciation is yeah, but. So I just made all that up. That's not even a real Greek word at all. But that's what we do, right? We justify ourselves. We go, yeah, but, yeah, that's true, but, yeah, I know I'm supposed to do that, but, yeah, I know I'm supposed to love people, Jesus, but have you met them? That guy earlier was right. People are really dumb. Yeah, I know I'm supposed to love my family, but have you met my family? Right? We're all guilty of the yeah, but. And it's at that moment that then Jesus launches into his story. And this is what he says in response. Verse 30, he says, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and when he was attacked by robbers, and they stripped him of his clothes because clothes were very valuable, they beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side, and so too a Levite who was like a temple assistant. And when he came to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him, or had compassion on him. And he went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Jesus asked the expert. The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. This is an incredible story. But at the risk of oversimplifying it, I think we could kind of summarize the elements of the story this way. Of the essence of what Jesus was getting at is that there are needs to notice. Those needs will have barriers that you're going to have to break through, and there will always be a price to pay. Most of what we've talked about this month really breaks down into one of those 3 categories. There are needs all around us just waiting for you and me to notice them. The thing is once you see them, right away you'll start to see all the barriers, all the reasons why you shouldn't get involved. All the reasons that justify, that provide the loophole, that provide the out for you to not get involved in that situation. The 3 men in the story were all different. But when they found the beaten guy on the side of the road, they were each immediately confronted with a whole bunch of barriers for why they personally shouldn't get involved. We talked about this the last few weeks. Like there were religious and historical and cultural and racial and even moral reasons and barriers for why they shouldn't get involved. And then there's the cost, right? Because if you get involved, like if you begin to push through those barriers, there's a price to pay. It always costs you something. Just breaking through the barriers comes at its own cost. And on top of that, in the story, like the Samaritan, actually helping him came with a real life cost. It came with a real life price tag as well. And what's interesting to me is that Jesus doesn't shy away from any of that. He doesn't try to like downplay it and just go, hey man, just like try to like, be nice to them. No, he leans into it. But there's something that Jesus tells us about the Samaritan in the story that he doesn't mention about either of the other 2. In verse 33, he says when the Samaritan comes by and he draws near, he gets close to the guy and he sees him. And he sees that he's in need. Jesus says he took pity on him. I mentioned a second ago, I kind of talked about the Greek thing, and maybe you know this and maybe you don't, but the New Testament, the writers wrote, and when they began to record these stories and write the events of Jesus' life, they wrote in the language of the Roman Empire, which they were a part of. They wrote in Greek. So when you read the New Testament, there are 3 or 4 different Greek words that get translated into English as the word compassion or mercy, or in this case, the case in this story is the word pity. And one of those words appears exclusively in the stories of the Gospels, the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's only used by Jesus, and it's only used by the disciples to describe Jesus. Now, I know I was kidding a second ago, this actually is a real Greek word. And so that Greek word is the word splagna. I don't speak Greek, so I don't know, but I like pronouncing it that way. It's probably splagna or something, splagna. It makes me feel like it's lasagna, splagna. I don't know. It feels weird. It's a fun word to say. But what's interesting is that it gets translated as compassion, or in this case, pity, but it actually refers to your intestines. It's actually about your guts. In other words, Jesus is saying, this is not a surface level compassion. This is not just feeling bad for somebody. It's gut deep. Like you see a need and you're moved by that. It's like somebody kicked you in the stomach. It's not just emotion. It's not sentiment. It's way beyond sympathy and even more than empathy. It's compassion that you feel deep in your gut. It's compassion that moves you to action. It's compassion that doesn't just feel, it actually does something. It acts. And this is the obvious difference between the Samaritan and the other two guys, right? That he stopped walking and he did something. See, I think it's easy for us to like read the story, even if you're just coming at this like for the first time. But it's easy for us to read the story and see the other two guys in the story. Clearly they were the villains, to see them as the heartless for not stopping. And maybe they were, but maybe they weren't. Maybe they saw the need, right? Maybe they were moved and felt terrible about the whole situation. Maybe they even wanted to get involved and they felt like they should do something. Maybe they had incredible sympathy for the guy who's laying there half dead. Maybe they genuinely prayed a deeply heartfelt prayer for him. But in the end, the compassion, whatever it is that they felt, it wasn't enough for them to stop and do something. They did not stop walking. They did not help. Whatever it is they felt, it wasn't splagna. The barriers kept them from getting involved. See, when I read this story, sometimes I can't help but wonder, I wonder if there's any chance that the priest and the Levite thought, man, that's terrible. I want so badly to help this guy. I'm just afraid. I'm afraid of what it's going to cost me. I'm afraid that maybe it's not allowed. Because I actually think that is, for most of us, in most situations, that's a very real barrier for us, right? You have a child or a parent that raised you, or a cousin or a coworker or a teammate, and you think to yourself, like, I want so badly to help them, but maybe it'd be wrong to help them. Because the church I was raised in, or the way that I was brought up, I don't think that my religion or the Bible or even God would allow me to help that person because it's clearly sinful. It'd be crossing some sort of line. I'd be seen as signing off on or approving of everything about them. And so we feel deeply for them, and we may even pray for them. And by the way, that is not nothing. But as Jesus is telling this story, and one guy goes by and then another guy goes by, Jesus makes it absolutely crystal clear that when it comes to people, we don't get to pick sides. That love isn't love until it actually acts, until it actually does something. That you can feel all kinds of stuff, but until you feel something that moves you to act, you actually haven't loved that person. See, the compassion and the love of God won't just move us emotionally. There will always, always, always move us to do something physically, to stop walking. Because regardless of the barriers, regardless of their choices, regardless of their history or their baggage, regardless of what they stand for, God is for them. They can deny him and hate him and oppose him. They can be living their lives trying to get other people to do the same. But God so loved them that he gave his only son for them. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, it says this. It says, "Praise be to God, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." See, God, he's the Father of compassion, and he's the God of all comfort. And he comforts us, at least according to this verse, he comforts us in all our troubles. Not some of them, not most of them, not a few of them. He doesn't pick and choose. He's like, I'm not helping you on this one. It was your stupid choices. It was your dumb fault that you got involved in this. You're the reason why you're laying down on the side of the road beaten bloodied. Like you did this to yourself. You figure it out. No, he doesn't ever do that with us. No, he comes, and because of his compassion, he comforts us in all of our troubles because he loves us. And also because then we can give away that same comfort and that same compassion that we got from him to other people. Not when we think they deserve it, but whenever they encounter trouble, whenever they need it, whenever life has punched them in the throat and they're laying on the ground just trying to figure out what's going on. See, I want to tell you that everything that God has done for and given to you, everything God has done for and given to me, it was for you. It was for me, but it wasn't just for you and it wasn't just for me. Everything God has done for and given to you was to help and to bless you, yes, but it was also meant for the purpose of helping and blessing other people, especially when they need it. God formed you and me. He formed you to be for, not against, for other people. Because he's not against anybody. He's for them. God, your gifts and your talents and abilities and resources, even based on these verses we just read, even your experiences, where you live and where you work, it might all seem random, or maybe you see it as exactly the way you carefully planned it out and executed it. Either way, the truth is God has positioned you right where he wants you so that you can make a difference with the people and the needs right around you in your life. God formed you to be for others. And honestly, this is true right down to your biochemistry, right down to your neurology, because he created us so that when we're compassionate, not just when we feel compassionate, but when we have splagna, when we love and care for and act and help someone else, in your brain is flooded with endorphins when you do that, so that you would feel great. And you don't just feel better, you're better off. And he didn't have to do that, but he did, right down to your biochemistry. He formed you to be for other people. And so Jesus says to the guy, love your neighbor as yourself. And when he does, he's giving us his family's code for how we would approach everybody. And then he tells his story that left no wiggle room, no loopholes for who's included in that and what it looks like. We don't ignore or pass by anybody. We're the ones who stop walking. We're the ones who run toward the broken and toward the messes, not away from them. We're not the ones that cross the street and keep going. We're the ones that move towards the messes. We stop walking. That's his family's code. So I enjoy sports, and I like football a lot. I like it a lot less when the Cowboys are not very good, and that's been like 30 years of my life. So, but I do enjoy football. But basketball is my first love. I played basketball in high school, and in the NBA, they give out the Sixth Man of the Year award every season, and it's always for a really good player. And the essence of it is like, you might not be a superstar, you might not be an all-star, you might not even be a starter, but when you get in the game, you flat out get it done. Your heart, your effort, your contribution is a difference maker. And I love that. In contrast, there's a lot of talk in football about the 12th man. It refers to the fans. And a few years ago, when the NFL's most annoying fans, the Seahawks fans, they went really big on this back in the day. I guess that was probably like 10 years ago. But the idea of the 12th man is that you can be a spectator and also somehow also be in. Like you're part of the game. You can affect the outcome. And honestly, that's pretty cool when it comes to sports. The problem is, I think we actually have a tendency to extend that to other areas of life, including faith. But I want to tell you this morning, that is not an idea that God would have anything to do with. See, I think part of what should challenge us and give us pause and make us think, and what we should wrestle with when we hear the story that Jesus told, is that he's like, look, if you're in this, you're in this. You're all in this. This is your mission. This is my code. This is the way that you live. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is what it looks like. Because the truth is, there's needs all around us. Someone in your orbit, someone in your life, someone in your neighborhood or at your job. Right now, someone who God loves, and Jesus died for, they have needs. They need you. And they may look like they got it all together on the outside. But inside they're hurting, or they're searching, or they're just empty, and they're hoping, and they're praying to the universe, or praying that if there's a God out there, for anybody to show up and help, to show them a sign that they matter, that their life isn't going down the toilet, that there's actually a point to what they're doing in their life, that God actually sees them and cares about them. And here's the thing. All of those people that fall into that category, God is absolutely going to do everything in his power to bring them to himself. He is going to bring them into his family, to invite them to have. He's in a conversation right now with them. Even when we ignore them, God is reaching out to them and drawing them and bringing them to this place. And I have to tell you, if you fall into that category, you're like, I'm not sure about all this God stuff. We know before you stepped in here, like, this isn't the beginning of the conversation God's having with you. God's been having a conversation with you long before you came here. And he just got you to this point so that you were surrounded by people who could actually love you. So God is absolutely going to bring those people to himself. The question is whether or not you and I are going to get to be a part of it or not. Because honestly, it's up to us. And when you begin to read the life of Jesus, if you follow him through the Gospels, roughly half of Jesus' miracles, they were interruptions. He had a plan, he had a destination, he was on his way somewhere, he was engaged with someone or something else, and then he was interrupted. And he diverted from what he was doing to love that person, to listen to them, to see their need and do something about it. Jesus was interruptible. If you and I are going to take on his code, if we're going to take on his ethic, if we're going to take on his approach to people, if you're going to experience the life that Jesus made you for, this is how. You have to be interruptible. You have to be inconvenienceable. And that's not even a word, but you need to be it. If we went around the room, I think most of us would go like, hey, yeah, of course, I want my life to matter. I want to make the world a better place, or at least just the world around me a better place. And honestly, if someone were to ask us, we would absolutely say that we're willing to help and we're willing to serve and we love people and we want to love the people around us. But what we should ask ourselves is, if we're all so willing to do that, why do so many of us do so little of it? I have conversations with people. I know people who regularly pray for God to use them to make a difference in their life, in the world. And here's the reality, is that God delivers a fresh batch of opportunities to our door every single day to make a difference, to matter. But we often miss them because they come disguised as ordinary inconveniences and interruptions. They're opportunities to love our neighbors, to have active compassion, but they come packaged as people that you don't know, or who are in your way, or people who aren't like you, or people who annoy you, or that you disagree with, people who you're not like, or people who just don't even like you. Or they're just situations that are inconvenient and really messy, and so you know what we do? We take a pass. If you've ever played team sports, you know who wants to spend all their time learning and studying and memorizing the plays and the playbook, but never actually get to run the play? Nobody. Nobody wants that. Not a single player I ever played with in my whole life is like, yeah, you know what I'd really like? I'd really like to memorize the playbook. But do you want to run it? No, I just want to know the plays. Everybody wants to get in the game. If you were in band, you didn't want to just learn the music. You wanted to actually play it. You wanted to take the risk of sitting down and playing the notes and performing. And I think Jesus' story makes it clear that God is inviting all of us. If you're a Jesus follower, he's inviting us to get in the game, but this is his game plan. This is how the play is run. And whether or not we do it, whether or not you're in the game is completely up to you. Don't just learn. Don't just memorize scripture. Don't just study. Don't just understand the idea of loving your neighbor. Actually do it. Run the play. Get in the game. Jesus is all in on his people, his movement, his strategy for reaching the world. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't have a backup plan, a plan B for loving my neighbors if I choose not to do it. He's like, I want you to get in the game. I want you to love those people. If you're not going to do it, I'm going to bring somebody else in who will get in the game and actually do it. You don't have to fix anybody. You don't have to save anybody. You couldn't do it even if you want. You couldn't do that even if you wanted to. God's the one who saves them. We just have to care enough to actually do something, to serve them, care enough to break through whatever the barriers are, whatever the excuses are, whatever the things are that we're using to justify not getting involved. We have to actually love people enough to pay the price. Every single interaction that you will have this week, even the small ones, even the inconvenient ones, maybe especially the inconvenient ones, has the capacity to be a divine appointment to love your neighbor as yourself. Has the capacity for you to share God's hope and for you to shine his light into their darkness. Because when you get God's heart, you actually become a conduit for God's compassion. Just like we read in 2 Corinthians 1. That's how we discover God's extraordinary life, through the choices that we make in our everyday, ordinary moments. The priest, the Levite, the religious people, they missed it. It always requires taking the risk. It always requires pushing through the barriers. Always requires paying a price. And here's what I believe with all of my heart as your pastor. If you made it through this series, you've been coming, you heard one or two, maybe you made all 4 weeks and you felt something and you were challenged by something. Maybe even you came to believe something or see God in a certain way or see yourself in a certain way or see the world in a little different way. But you don't do something. You don't do anything about it. It's all a waste. It means that you know just enough truth to be dangerous. Because the uncomfortable reality, if you're a Jesus follower, if you're a church person, of reading the story that Jesus told in its context, which is that conversation between him and the religious expert, is that if you're a Christian, the person that we most often resemble in the whole thing is the expert in the law. It's the guy who knows the right answer but has the wrong application. So what's the right application for us? It's the same one Jesus said to him at the end of the story. Go and do likewise. Not go and feel, not go and believe, not go and tell, not go and pray, not go and be right, not go and prove. Go and do. Go and splagna. Go and do. Normally I have a challenge for you every week at the end of the message, something practical for you to try to put the things that we're talking about on Sundays into practice during the week. But honestly, I was just like, I don't know what that is. Because the simplicity of this is like, go do something. Just do anything. Do something. Find a way to run the play. Get in the game. Love your neighbor. See a need. Break through the barrier. Pay the price. See a need. Break through the barriers. Pay the price. Splagna. Love somebody. Be interruptible. Stop walking. Don't automatically avoid the messes and the inconveniences. Don't just feel something. Do something. Yes, pray for them, but then do something. Let your compassion move you to action. That is the point of Jesus' story. That's what his people would be about. Because in the grand scheme of things, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, we're the guy on the ground. And God has come to rescue us. We're the people who were broken and bloody. And God stopped walking and came and picked us up. And he gave us comfort and love and healing and grace and mercy in our time of trouble for us, but also so that we could take it and give it away to other people. Let's pray together.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that he's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the third way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the fourth way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that he can bless and anoint your finances and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you and thank you for watching our online service today.